This is what I would never do as a doctor obsessed with women's health, and I wish more people knew about. And if you're thinking, Faye, I do not want to be lectured about eating more vegetables and not smoking, then I promise these are mistakes that you will not hear anywhere else, and I do not think enough people are talking about. With fertility rates declining, the president of the USA spreading misinformation, and 1 in 10 women being affected by conditions like endometriosis or PCOS, it has never been more important to get your information about your body from a reliable source. Luckily, the Her Discussions podcast is here to help you navigate the science and give you actionable, easy tips to help you live a happier, healthier life. So if that sounds like something you would be interested in, then make sure to hit the subscribe button or the follow button, depending on what podcast platform you are listening on, and maybe even give us a 5-star review. Make sure you stick around until the end of the episode because I'll be sharing my most important lesson. But first, let's start with something that makes me extremely angry. Number 1, I would never use a period tracker that doesn't protect my data. So this is based on a TikTok that I saw today that made me really, really, really upset. But to explain the context, in the UK and the US, the landscape of women's health and reproductive rights has changed considerably in the last few years. Starting with 2022, you may have unfortunately heard that Roe versus Wade got overturned in the US. Basically, Roe versus Wade was this landmark case that made abortion legal in the US. When it was overturned, it meant that every state now had to decide whether they would allow abortion or not. Some states completely banned abortions and others severely restricted the access to safe abortions. Now, I will explain what on earth any of this has to do with period trackers, but first we still need to understand why on earth this affects any of us across the pond in the UK, because I think with a certain human Cheeto in power, it can be very easy to see women's and reproductive health rights as just a US issue when unfortunately that's not the case. This year, something extremely scary happened in the UK. The National Police Chiefs Council released a statement saying that if a woman had a miscarriage or a stillbirth, they would consider reviewing her search history, her period tracking apps, and even her private messages to establish what her knowledge or intention was with the pregnancy. And I'm sure you're wondering, why would they want access to that information? Well, this guidance came out just after a 45-year-old woman was taken to court and found not guilty for taking abortion pills at home during the COVID lockdown. And the issue was she took them at 26 weeks. And she said in court that she would never have taken them if she knew how far along she was, because now in the UK, you can only take abortion medication up to 10 weeks or have an abortion in a clinic up to 24 weeks. Thankfully, she was found not guilty. But the idea that you could possibly be taken to court after having a miscarriage and accused of having an illegal abortion or even just having your personal data gone through like that is absolutely terrifying. And this, in combination with what is going on in the US at the moment, has obviously left people extremely anxious about putting data onto their cycle apps. So this morning when I was on social media and I saw this video, and it was basically a video of a mother talking about why she would never, ever let her daughter use a period tracker app. And it made me really, really angry that this information was being spread, number one, but also really, really sad that this woman had completely lost faith in health apps to the point where she was completely adamant she wouldn't even let her daughter tell a telemedicine doctor when her last period was, because she was so scared about how that data would be used. It feels like we've gone backwards because over the last few years, there's been incredible conversations around the importance of seeing your menstrual cycle like a sixth vital sign and encouraging women to actually take it seriously and take note. But now we're going backwards and women don't feel like they can do that safely. Now I track my cycle and I will come on to how you can do that safely yourself. But first, if you do not track your cycle, then why should you be doing it? So the average time it takes to get a diagnosis of endometriosis in the UK is 8 to 10 years. And the average time it takes to get a diagnosis of PCOS in the UK is about 2 to 3 years. If you track your cycle, you will be able to spot the telltale signs of these conditions so much earlier. But not only that, you will be able to take that data and take it straight to your doctor, so that the first time you see your doctor about these conditions, they don't just say to you, come back in a couple months when you've tracked your cycle and I can look through the data. But beyond that, and I'll come on to this so much later, if you're not already subscribed on YouTube or following on Spotify, then what are you doing? The Her Discussion podcast is here for you to get answers about women's health from a reliable source. So make sure to click that button. It only takes 2 seconds. Just tracking my cycle has given me so much freedom in terms of I no longer feel guilty if at certain points I feel a little bit more sluggish, a little bit more hungry, a little bit more tired, moody, whatever. I'm able to understand why that's going on and not beat myself up. But what are the actionable steps you can take to protect yourself? Number one, I want to point out that in the UK in June this year, we actually decriminalised abortion. Now, that is a little bit difficult to explain because abortions in certain circumstances have been legal in the UK since 1967. However, the decriminalisation of abortion means that you can no longer be taken to court for terminating a pregnancy. So this guidance that the National Police Chiefs Council put out earlier this year isn't really relevant because in theory, police shouldn't be investigating miscarriages or stillbirths anymore now that abortion is decriminalised. However, in the current climate of today's world, you really don't know what direction things are going to go. And I think taking actions to protect your data is never a bad one. So making sure that you are using apps that encrypt your data is really, really important. A lot of apps offer the option to do an anonymous profile. Also making sure that you use apps where you can wipe your data if needed, and having a PIN on the app or having Face ID. It's really sad that the demonization of these apps is happening. And I can understand why people are mistrustful, but I don't think that that should mean that they lose out on such an incredible tool when there are steps they can take to minimize the risk of their data being used against them. Number 2 thing I would never do, ignore smells. If I see one more feminine hygiene video crop up on YouTube, I will actually scream. As a doctor, I hate this idea on social media that if something doesn't smell great, there is a cream for that, there's a wash for that, there's a supplement or something that you can buy in Holland and Barrett. If there is a smell that is unfamiliar to you, that can not only be a sign of an STI or an imbalance of the bacteria down there, it can sometimes be a sign of certain cancers. And I just think some of these videos perpetuate this idea that it's shameful or should be dealt with in the comfort of your own home, when a medical problem is a medical problem and you should see your doctor. Coming on to any actionable advice or tips that I do not have a single one apart from go and see your doctor, because the YouTuber making the video about feminine hygiene absolutely cannot smell you or see what is going on. There is no way for someone on the internet to decide whether what you have is something like bacterial vaginosis, an STI, or a cancer. We absolutely should not be taking advice on how those things should be dealt with from the internet. The next thing that I would never do is a little bit cliche, but I would never stop learning. If you are someone who has Alzheimer's or dementia in your family, I'm gonna need you to listen, because when we become adults, I feel like we can slip into this routine where we get a job and the job tends to be the same-ish thing every single day. We stop engaging our brain in a way that is challenging to us, and mental stimulation has so many benefits, which is why Skillshare has been a part of my weekly routine for the last 5 years. Right now I'm loving art journaling for self-care, 3 exercises for reflection and growth.
Life has been so go and full on lately, so it's really nice to have something that grounds me, something that brings me back to the present and helps me untangle my thoughts. Research shows that being creative can boost your mental well-being, but I'm also so obsessed with Skillshare for many reasons.
World-class creatives teach the stuff they do, illustrators, designers, successful entrepreneurs, and you learn by making. You're not just passively letting the information flow over you. You are mentally stimulating your brain with projects and practical exercises so you can put into practice what you learn right away. The platform is also built for busy members, so you can watch on your desktop or your phone or your iPad on the go if you are looking for something to do to make use of your morning commute.
The first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. I am telling you, it is so worth it.
It is honestly one of the few platforms that I revisit every single week because of how incredible it feels to keep learning as part of my weekly routine. And if you do end up trying a new class, then please let me know in the comments because I would love to try a new class myself. So I'd love to hear what you recommend. Next one may seem a little bit random, but I do not see it being talked about enough, and it could actually increase your risk of certain cancers. So I would never use a hot water bottle directly on my skin. So the reason being, you can get this mottled rash called erythema abigni, which is also known as toasted skin syndrome. And basically it happens when a heat source is put on the skin, but it's less than 45 degrees. So it's not enough to cause a traditional burn, but long enough exposure can really damage the skin and leave this rash. So examples of things that might do this: putting a laptop on your legs, heated car seats, heated blankets, and hot water bottles. What is even scarier is there is some research suggesting that in decades' time, that may even turn into some forms of skin cancer. Actionable steps: stop. Number 1, if you remove the heat source, it may take a while, but the rash should disappear. Or if you really need your hot water bottle, maybe you've got cramps and you just don't feel like you can manage them without the hot water bottle, then just add in an extra layer between you and the hot water bottle to reduce the heat exposure to your skin. But that doesn't really address the core issue, which is you needing a hot water bottle to get through your period. That should not be normalized, and brings me nicely on to the next thing I would never do. I would never ignore bad periods just because I don't want to be seen as being difficult. I was so shocked when on a recent podcast episode, Dr. Nagler, a fertility expert, spoke about how a lot of women, the first time that they get diagnosed with PCOS or endometriosis is when they are trying for a baby. And it really upset me that you could be going through something as life-altering and emotionally draining as infertility and then receive another diagnosis that may explain so many symptoms you've experienced for probably a decade before that. What's even more frustrating is I know that there are so many women who go to the doctors and have the experience of being dismissed when they have bad period symptoms and just being told to come back when they want to get pregnant. If you have experienced that, then we do have a podcast episode coming out with Dr. Tosin that is all about advocating for yourself as a woman. So if you do not want to miss that episode, then make sure that you are subscribed. But your period symptoms being dismissed isn't just not nice to hear as a person. It can also have extremely detrimental health consequences. So I want to do a full video all about PCOS that explains this a little bit better in the future, but just a quick science overview so that you understand why you need to be getting these answers from your doctors. PCOS is polycystic ovary syndrome, but there's a lot of talk about the name being changed because you don't actually need cysts in your ovaries to have PCOS. I know it does not make any sense, but a huge part of PCOS, arguably bigger than the cysts on ovaries, is the effects on the metabolism. So people with PCOS tend to struggle to lose weight more, and people with PCOS are more likely to experience high blood pressure, diabetes, heart attacks, and even strokes. Infertility does affect some people with PCOS. So yes, baby making is an issue. However, it is so much more than that, and not getting a diagnosis early can really affect your health outcomes later in life. Then endometriosis is basically where cells that are like the lining of the womb grow elsewhere in the body. The main symptoms to look out for with endometriosis are heavy periods, extremely painful periods, pain when you're going to the toilet, bleeding, or pain during sex. Early treatment of endometriosis has been shown to not only slow, but potentially even halt the progression of the condition, which makes the statistic that it takes an average of 8 to 10 years to get a diagnosis of endometriosis even more sickening. But even scarier is endometriosis and PCOS can both actually increase the risk of developing certain cancers. So it makes me so sad every time I speak to a woman who is just battling through period symptoms that absolutely should not be normalized, because she doesn't want to go to the doctor and make a fuss when everyone else is getting on with their periods fine. Actionable advice: number 1, track your periods. Number 2, when you finally do get a GP appointment, because I know that is a whole other mission in itself, you are going to bring the data from your period tracking. With Apple, I know you can export it as a PDF. If you can't export it as a PDF, screenshot it, email it to your GP so they have it on record, because you are so much harder to dismiss when the data is staring your doctor in the face. Doctors are people of science. We like numbers, and having that data just makes our lives easier, and it makes your life easier as well. The next lesson, I'm going to admit, I learned a little bit too late. So I would never anymore leave thinking about my fertility until I was thinking about having a baby. The podcast episode that we did with Dr. Nagler framed this in a really, really lovely way that I'd never really thought about. And that is, if you knew that strokes or heart attacks or cancers ran in your family, you wouldn't wait until you were in your 50s or 60s to take action to minimize those risks. So it's like saying that to prevent a heart attack, you're going to start exercising in your 60s. No, you want to live a healthier life. You know that the earlier you start making those healthier changes, the better the impact it's going to have. And she related this to infertility and how we spend so much time in school being taught how to not get pregnant, and actually, to be honest, worrying about trying to avoid getting pregnant, that a lot of people, as soon as they come off birth control, they think it's going to be this really easy thing because we've spent so many years avoiding it like the plague. And what's happening is we aren't having those conversations about fertility with kids. Probably a little bit of a controversial opinion that I have is that we should be teaching the basics of fertility alongside teaching the basics of contraception when kids are in a classroom. Obviously, if you've seen the video where I got some fertility investigations done, or you've listened to the episode with Dr. Nagler, then you'll know that fertility has not been a conversation that I was necessarily having 2 years ago, even like a year ago. And processing all that information in the last few months has been a lot. And that, I'm saying that as a doctor. So it really scares me that there's so many people out there who actually don't have access to the same information that I had access to, and might get really nasty surprises in a couple of years' time when it comes to them wanting to start a family. That was all a little bit doom and gloom and scary. But the actionable tips that I would give would be start by watching the episode with Dr. Nagler. She explains it all in a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful way. Or the video where I get my fertility investigations checked. Also a great place to start if you're just starting to think about fertility. But on a personal level, I think having some really, really honest reflections with yourself about how important that is for you in your life, because I know for so many people, it's not something that's important to them, and that is so fine. But for a lot of women, it is. And I also think it can sometimes make women feel a little bit guilty that it is something that they care about, especially if you're a woman who has put a lot of effort into her career for many, many years. It can feel like you're selling out. I know I got a lot of comments on some of my YouTube videos when I started talking about fertility, of people saying that they were really disappointed in me, that I was almost turning my back on my career for a family. And, you know, this isn't what the video is about, but that just really, really annoyed me. I think feminism is wonderful, but feminism gave us choice. It didn't say that all women should be now working. That doesn't mean, and it shouldn't mean, that wanting to have a family makes you any less of a feminist. I can't believe I'm having to specify that. That's kind of crazy. And I think maybe we also need to remember that if people birthing babies didn't exist, there would be no more birthing babies. There would be no more human population on this planet. So something I think maybe we need to be talking about a little bit more. And especially if you're in a relationship, having those really, really honest conversations. And I hate that it's often women who are having to bring up these things because, you know, it does end up being the burden falls on us, especially when a third of infertility is linked to men and a third linked to a combination of men and women. So it would be amazing if these were conversations that didn't always feel as one-sided. But that's kind of rare at the moment. And if you're able to educate someone else, then I think that's a great thing to do. And then I am going to say some really basic stuff, but if having kids is important to you, getting rid of your vape, stopping smoking, stopping binge drinking, eating a healthy diet, making sure you're moving your body, the boring basics. You don't need to start with these fancy schmancy at-home tests, just making sure you know the things that could potentially affect your fertility, and if you can, stopping them. The next one I'm gonna have to try and explain without getting demonetized, so bear with me. I would never put anything inside your body that is not designed to go inside your body. And I'm going to explain this in a way that doesn't look badly on the medical profession. However, most doctors I know, myself included, have several stories of patients that we have seen who have decided to put objects inside their body, various holes that exist inside their body, and not being able to retrieve them afterwards. That has meant that they have presented to a local hospital where we have been working. And often these objects are very interesting. Just to name a few, potatoes, carrots, fairly standard. Once had a weight, a little dumbbell. That was an interesting one. If any of you are listening and you have ever thought about putting an object that is not meant to go inside you, then I would like to reassure you with a couple things. Firstly, that it's a more frequent occurrence than you would think. Therefore, you are actually not alone if you have ever had that urge. Also, there are whole companies that have built millions and millions and millions of pounds on creating objects that are a little bit more suitable to be inserted into orifices. Objects that normally have a nice wide base so they're not going to get stuck. You know what? Often those projects are delivered with lovely discreet packaging and no one would ever know. So do your local A&E a favour and do those online shops a favour and purchase something from them and stay away from the poor carrots. The next thing I would never do is slightly more emotional and serious than the last one, and that is I would never fat shame myself or anyone else. And this relates to my own personal journey with losing weight. And a couple of years ago I went through a breakup, and after the breakup I really took solace in comfort eating. And over the course of literally a couple of months, I went from someone whose BMI was healthy to someone whose BMI was overweight and very almost in the obese section. And I found this really challenging because as a doctor, I know that having excess fat, especially around your midsection, increases your risk of heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, cancers. It's not good. But I found it really difficult to marry that with what I was seeing on social media of body acceptance and body confidence, because that is something I firmly agree with. However, I didn't do a very good job of marrying those two things together. And I basically just tried to bully myself into losing weight. I remember having this board saved on my Instagram that had like the goal weight that I wanted to be as the title. And I would just look through pictures of fit people all the time, or look in the mirror and point out all the things I did not like about my body, in the hopes that that would make me feel crap enough that I would decide to make a positive change with my lifestyle. Unfortunately, that absolutely did not work. It made things worse. And I'm speaking about this from a personal perspective now rather than a medical research-backed perspective. But when I felt crap about myself because I'd been pointing out things that I hated in the mirror, that just made me want to eat crappy food to make myself feel better. And it didn't make me want to move my body. I just wanted to lie in my bed and wallow in how much I hated myself. And the only time I really saw positive change was when I accepted the body I was in, but shifted my mindset. And the actionable tips I would give for you, if you're currently in a place where you're struggling with your weight, is these are the mantras that got me through. And that was, you love yourself enough that you deserve to eat nutritious food. You love yourself enough that you deserve to move your body and get that endorphin hit from going for a run or going to the gym. Like, you are doing this out of love for yourself, not hatred. And that probably won't get you as quick results. I know a lot of people who love a crash diet, but that's the mindset that helps you form a healthy lifestyle that lasts a lifetime. And I really need to remind you that the same diets that work for men are not going to be the same diets that work for women. When you are in your luteal phase of your cycle, your body can consume up to 300 extra calories a day, which means you are hungrier, you have different cravings. If there is a male personal trainer who wants to put you on a 6-week plan where you are severely restricting your calories, when your menstrual cycle is 28 days, so a significant portion of that 6-week plan, they might not work together hand in hand. I think when men operate on this 24-hour hormone cycle, going on a diet can be a lot more predictable for them in terms of what their hormones and their hunger levels are doing. But with women, there is no one day of your cycle that is the same. And that is extremely difficult to navigate in all areas of your life, your mental health, your productivity, and also your appetite, which influences how well dieting is going to go for you. And I can't help but feel that by putting women on these diets that are designed for men, we are setting them up for failure, so that they get to the end of the diet, they feel crappy about themselves, and then they just end up even worse than they were before, where they build up this image that they have of themselves as someone who just isn't cut out for a healthy lifestyle, and that's just not the case. Next, I have not heard enough people talking about, and I think the fact we're not talking about it worries me a lot, and that is, I would never do an at-home test unless I knew what I needed to do after it. So over the last few years, there's been this huge boom in the at-home medical testing that you can do, whether that is DNA testing, whether that is a little finger prick blood test that gives you some of your hormone levels, or a stool sample that looks at your microbiome, or a urine sample, whatever. You do them in the comfort of your own home. They're usually quite accessible in terms of the price, usually a little bit cheaper than going to a private clinic and seeing a doctor. But you do these tests and then you get the results, and often you haven't been told what happens after you get those results. And these companies will suggest you do things that cost more, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And actually, in the end, you can end up spending more than if you'd just gone to see the doctor in the private clinic in the first place. But more importantly than that, you might actually get test results that have a significant emotional impact. So in the fertility video that we filmed, where I got some fertility investigations done, I went to a really high-end Harley Street Fertility Clinic. I got my results explained to me by a consultant who was one of the registrars on the first IVF baby. So this extremely experienced consultant, and they offer this service for all in for £500, which is a lot of money, especially in the cost of living crisis. But then I also did an at-home test. I didn't have my results explained to me by an experienced professional. And actually, once you added on all the extras they suggested after I got the test, it ended up being more expensive. And it's something I wish more people knew about, that just getting the test is only the first step. So they can not only financially plan for that, but also emotionally plan for that. I would never sleep with my phone by my bed. And if you're thinking, Faye, what if there's an emergency, or I need my alarm clock or whatever, I have the answers, but just give me a second to explain why I never sleep with my phone by my bed. So if there's one thing we have so much data on, it's how poor sleep impacts almost every single metric we have of health. You are more likely to die earlier if you get worse sleep. You are more likely to develop cancers if you get worse sleep, diabetes, heart attacks, strokes. I know I do sound like a broken record, but poor sleep is bad, okay? We know that. There's no ifs, no buts. It's bad. We know that our phones are designed to be these addictive, dopamine, slot machine-esque handheld devices that are just meant to leech all of our attention and keep us as wired as possible. So they are just not good to be having when you are trying to relax and switch off. And I've seen so many of my friends recently start taking melatonin because of their sleep. Melatonin is a whole other conversation in itself. If you would like me to make a video on melatonin, I will happily do so, but I'm not going to unpack that kind of worms right now. But when they tell me they're taking melatonin to help them sleep, and then I ask them whether they go on their phone in bed, almost all of them have said yes. Please, for the love of God, stop going on your phone in bed. Our brain is a pattern recognition machine. If you are going on your phone in bed, your brain is going to associate your bed with phone time, with TikTok time, with intense stimulation. It's not going to associate that area of your home with relaxation and calm. So getting your phone out your bedroom should be the first thing before you even think about taking melatonin. If you are someone who has responsibilities, maybe you're an on-call doctor, you need it by your bed, so fine, get yourself a Nokia. Or they do these gorgeous vintage spinny phones, you know, the ones where you dial the numbers. They're very aesthetic. They would look gorgeous on a bedside table. Get yourself a phone that you can just call on. You don't need social media apps or anything else that is going to distract you. Also, I found it really helpful was having a book on my bedside table, and a book that I genuinely was excited to read when it came to getting to bed at night. Admittedly, if the book is a little bit too good, I do probably end up reading it a little bit longer than a little bit past my bedtime. However, when I read, I am slowly getting a little bit more tired as each page passes. When I'm scrolling on my phone, I just do not feel like I'm getting any more tired as time goes on. If there's only two that you actually take advice from this entire video, then please let it be this. I don't think that you'll necessarily be expecting them, but they are definitely the two most important things I've learned as a doctor. So I would never avoid talking about death. And this comes from my experience working in palliative medicine. So if you don't know what palliative medicine is, then palliative doctors focus on symptom control rather than curing a condition. So it kind of has this reputation of being associated with dying, which a lot of the patients that I did look after were in the last few months or weeks or even days of their life. But beyond that, it is more about symptom control. And I think that's really important to specify, because there's so many patients that I met where they weren't in the last few months, weeks, days of their life. But when you said you were working in the palliative medicine department, they would get really, really anxious and really worried that they were going to die. And that's not always the case. Palliative medicine doctors are really incredible for pain control, for controlling vomiting, constipation, shortness of breath, a lot of symptoms that come along with a lot of conditions that aren't always going to kill someone. But these 4 months I spent working in the palliative department just completely changed my outlook on life. But one of the biggest take homes I had was have conversations about death with your family. They do not need to be dark and sad and depressing. You can make a joke out of it. You can use comedy to make these conversations seem lighthearted. But the reason I wanted to include this is I have seen so many families torn apart at someone's deathbed because they cannot agree on what this person would have wanted, whether they would have wanted organ donation, whether they would have wanted to die in hospital, to die at home, to die in a care home, whether they would have wanted an operation, to save their life, or whether they would have thought, I've had a good life, I just would like to drift off peacefully. These decisions, when families have to make these decisions and they don't know what someone would have wanted in this really emotional situation where everything feels like a high pressure cooker, I found it's almost an excuse to argue with each other. It's like you see these family members taking out the emotional pain they're feeling about the situation out on each other. And it's just heartbreaking because it's a point in all of their lives where they all really, really, really need each other, and they need to be this cohesive unit that sticks together and supports each other. And it becomes a really, really angry and even more stressful time. So just have these conversations. I know it's not nice, I know it's not pretty, but if something happens in your family or to someone you know that sparks these things, use it as a catalyst. Right now, I am young, I'm fit and healthy, touch wood. But so I would, if I became ill, I would likely want any surgery that could be done to help me, any treatments that could be done to help me. I would want someone to give me CPR if my heart was to stop. But if I was in my 70s or my 80s and I had a lot of other health conditions, that answer would be completely different. And, now I probably would want to die in a hospital knowing that every single possible thing had been tried. In my 70s and my 80s, I probably would rather be left alone and die at my home or in a hospice surrounded by people I love. And I think as British people, we're even now bringing up this topic, I feel really guilty because I think I'm thinking, oh God, I don't want to make anyone feel depressed or sad or leave them end this episode on a bad note. As Brits, we're just so bad for talking about death. I think other cultures do death so much better than us. And remembering it doesn't need to be this awful, awful conversations. I make jokes. I maybe shouldn't say this. I make jokes about my nana dying to her all the time. But because of that, we have really open dialogues about death, and we have done for the last 10 years. I'm not saying make stupid jokes about death to family members who may not take it well. My nana has a great sense of humour, but just open up these conversations. The last one I want to leave you with, and as this is a solo episode, maybe this is my what I wish every woman knew by the time she was 25. Super, super, super cliche, but I would never end a phone call with anyone I loved without telling them I love you. And that comes from seeing way too many people who did not think they were going to die. You can eat all the fruits and veggies in the world. You can exercise every single day. You can not smoke, not drink, do every single thing right. And life can then still end up being an absolute bitch and catch you off guard in ways that you never really saw coming. And I would hate anything like that to ever happen to anyone that I loved. And the last thing that I did not say to them was, I love you. So that's a little bit of a dark one to end on. However, I think it's an important one. It also does not need to be dark. The main message is to just celebrate love a little bit more, because you really do not know what is around the corner. thank you so much for listening, whatever you're listening on. If you enjoyed watching this video, then you may enjoy the podcast episode where I spoke to Dr. Nagler, which will be on screen now, or the video just below it, which has been recommended specifically for you based on what you are interested in. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next video.